My brother made my life hell and then got my wife pregnant. Now he seeks my help after our parents disowned him, leaving me with their $2 million inheritance. My younger brother, David, has always held a deep-seated resentment towards me. If you believe it stems from jealousy, you'd be mistaken. He was the favored child, not me. There was no basis for him to be envious. To give you some context, our mother always indulged David. He was the golden child in our family. She made his meals, did his laundry, and even asked me to assist him with his homework. I was expected to help him just because we were family, but I never received that same consideration. I accepted this since I was quite independent. Perhaps it was partly my fault for constantly meeting his needs without expecting anything in return. He never helped me when I needed it, and only came to me when he wanted something. While I was a quiet, introverted kid who preferred studying and solitude, he was loud and rough, just like our dad. I also tend to be honest and straight to the point, never sugarcoating things. I believe my mother may have developed a negative perception of me due to my bluntness. This favoritism made David the family's darling, and I didn't mind it when we were growing up. However, issues surfaced when he began bullying and mocking me for being different from him. He would ridicule me for my height and glasses. He'd sneak into my room, read my diary, and then complain to our mom about what I wrote. When I shouted at him and told our parents about him invading my privacy, they would laugh it off, saying it wasn't serious. He did worse things, like nearly breaking my glasses and putting disgusting things in my food. Once, he even put little stones in my cereal, but thankfully I found them before they could harm my teeth. When I informed my mom, she dismissed it, saying, "This is just how brothers bond." Whenever we fought, David would focus on my insecurities to insult me. We attended the same school, so he knew I was being bullied by a few kids. Instead of backing me up, he sided with the bullies, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, and encouraging them to physically hurt me, asserting I was just a big failure. On another occasion, during a fight over something minor I can't recall, he told me to kill myself. While I could easily overlook most insults, that one truly stung, as I was struggling with my mental health at the time. I'm better now, but it was devastating to learn that my own brother wanted me dead, especially since Dad was often at work and Mom seemed indifferent. She scolded me once, claiming it was my fault for bothering him. Things progressively got worse in high school. There was a shocking incident when David tried to set my hair ablaze, and unbelievably, our mother defended him, claiming he was just playing. Seriously, who acts like that? Thankfully, my dad finally sided with me and pointed out the seriousness of the issue. He even threatened to call the police on David. This moment was a real wake-up call for my brother, who had never faced any repercussions for his actions before. He was genuinely taken aback. My dad made it clear that enough was enough and that David needed to start respecting his older brother. Later, Dad came into my room for a talk. I never expected his backing, as he often told David how similar they were, which was true. Dad admitted he had waited for years, hoping David would mature, but was slowly coming to the realization that David was turning into a big bully. Hearing this from my dad was incredibly affirming, and I nearly broke down in tears. I shared everything David had done to me over the years, including the school bullying. My dad was shocked by how much I had endured. Next day, he spoke to the principal to ensure the bullies received warnings about severe repercussions should they continue. Later that evening, Dad enrolled me in MMA classes at our local gym, telling me I needed to toughen up and confront the bullies in my life. I admit that a nerdy kid like me trying to learn to fight may have appeared ridiculous, but I was incredibly focused. I managed my time well, balancing my studies and daily workouts, and the MMA classes completely transformed my life and physique. One day, David was up to his antics again. He stole my pocket money, which we received for helping with chores. I had been saving it for a while, and David sneaked into my room and took it. I caught him just as he was about to ride off with his friends. I demanded he return my money, but David mocked me, saying all I could do was run to Daddy for help. I don't know what came over me, but I punched him in the face. He was stunned, fell backward, and I retrieved my money from his pocket before throwing him back down. David started crying loudly, which was quite humorous. However, my mother rushed out to help him and to find out what happened. When she discovered I had fought him, she was shocked and reprimanded me, claiming I should be a better role model for David, who seemed to enjoy witnessing my scolding. My mother also complained to my dad about my behavior, saying I needed to be controlled. My dad grimly asked both of us to explain our actions. I told him how David had stolen the money I had worked hard to earn and save, while David attempted to justify it by saying he needed it for a date, and that, as his brother, I should help him. However, Dad told David he was fortunate I only punched him for stealing because anyone else would have called the police. He went on to tell David that he had no right to take others' belongings without their consent. David didn't like this and threw a tantrum, likely hoping our mother would support him. But Dad remained firm. When David realized he wouldn't face any consequences for being hit, he screamed about how much he hated me and retreated to his room, locking himself in. After that incident, David began to distance himself from me. He finally realized he couldn't bully me anymore, and that even Dad had ceased supporting his antics. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were equals. Although he could no longer physically harm me, he resorted to verbal insults when our parents weren't around. His behavior worsened with age, growing angrier and more short-tempered each passing year. Whenever I approached him with a question, he would ignore me and walk away, muttering insults like nerd or loser under his breath. If he needed to communicate something, he would relay it through our mother instead of talking to me directly. When I asked her why David couldn't just speak to me, she would urge me to be more understanding. I couldn't tell if it was simply puberty or genuine hatred. Over time, coping with his remarks became unbearable, and I yearned to move out and escape from him. I consistently requested my mother facilitate a sit-down conversation to resolve our issues, but she continually refused, claiming she didn't want to get involved. When I asked her opinion on why David treated me this way, she would brush off the question. Eventually, I departed from my dream university after earning a scholarship as a top student. My dad threw a party for me, and even my mom seemed proud. However, David remained aloof and distant, barely acknowledging my accomplishments. The day I left for university was a mix of excitement for the future and relief from escaping the toxic home environment. The first few months at university were liberating. I made new friends, enjoyed my classes, and began to build a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere of my childhood. The constant anxiety from David's verbal assaults lifted, bringing me a newfound sense of peace. During my second year, I met my wife Karen at a frat party through a friend, and we immediately hit it off. Coming from a religious background, having children outside of marriage was frowned upon. However, when we discovered she was pregnant in our final year, we decided to marry right after graduation. Our wedding was a small but happy ceremony. Our parents were delighted for us, and we cherished the celebration. At that moment, I believed Karen was the love of my life. I had always envisioned a monogamous relationship, one woman to share my life with. And despite other women's interest over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content in my marriage. Karen was my ideal partner, and I never wanted to hurt her. However, I later discovered 2 incidents of infidelity in our marriage. One was a long-term affair with her married co-worker that lasted several years, and the other was a brief fling with an ex-boyfriend during a visit to her family. Some might consider me naive, and looking back, I can't entirely dispute that. Each time we temporarily separated, I chose to forgive my wife. I wanted to raise our child in a stable home and believed we could overcome these challenges. The affair with her co-worker occurred when we were young, and I attributed it to youthful mistakes and poor judgment. For a time, things seemed to improve, although I could never fully regain my trust in her. I did my best to set aside my doubts, knowing that if I chose to forgive her, I had to genuinely work towards a fresh start. It's been 4 years since her second betrayal, and I felt confident in my decision to give her another chance. Karen appeared to have changed, and we were genuinely happy, planning our family's future. However, 3 months ago, my world came crashing down once again when she revealed she had been having a long-term affair and suggested that our son might not be mine. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks, overwhelming me with shock, betrayal, and disbelief. I struggled to grasp the enormity of her confession. In a daze, I managed to ask why she had kept such a critical secret and how she could have inflicted such devastation. Her reaction was cold and indifferent, as if she were detached from the pain she caused. Her vague responses left me with more questions than answers. It was a surreal and painful moment, confronting the shattered trust and uncertainty surrounding my family. I continued to press Karen for the truth, because I felt I deserved to know who the father of the child I had been raising since birth was. Ultimately, she admitted it was David. My eyes widened in shock as I asked Karen what she meant. She explained that she and David had become friends when I introduced her to my family, and she spent the Thanksgiving holiday with us until New Year's. David, usually cold to me, was warm and polite toward her, which made me glad since I didn't want Karen to feel unwelcome. Karen wanted to fit into my family, so she spent significant time with my mom whenever possible. She noticed the rift between David and me and questioned me about it. I confided in her about our strained relationship and explained that we might never repair it due to his unresolved feelings. Karen understood, but began including David in our outings, hoping it would help us bond. Whenever we planned to watch a movie, she invited David, and we watched whatever he chose. During this period, David and I exchanged a few words, which was an improvement compared to his usual silence. I remember Karen and David hanging out and playing video games together, but never thought much of it. Karen told me that one day David opened up to her about his struggles following a recent breakup. Feeling vulnerable, he struck up a friendship with her. She mentioned he would flirt harmlessly with her when I wasn't around, and eventually, things escalated beyond her control. The vision of my wife and brother sleeping together made me feel ill. Karen admitted she felt guilty afterward and broke off contact with him, which matched her sudden decision to return home instead of spending New Year's with me. Although I tried to persuade her to stay, she was adamant about leaving. When we reunited at college after the holidays, she was her usual cheerful self, so I didn't question anything. 2 weeks later, we learned she was pregnant. Karen confessed she didn't know if the child was mine or David's, and since there was no way to prove it, she chose to stay with me, knowing I was the more dependable brother. This is why we got married. My world felt like it was collapsing. The son I loved might not even be mine. I asked Karen if she had been sleeping with David recently, and she nodded slowly. She revealed they had always stayed in touch because their chemistry was undeniable. They would sneak off to hotels, lying to me about working overtime. She confessed that half of her business trips were actually romantic getaways with him. I asked her why she married me if she wanted my brother, and Karen said she didn't want to be the one to end the marriage. She viewed me as an excellent father to our son and decided to stay. In her words, she had made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I told Karen I was glad she came clean, but that I was packing up and leaving. She began crying, begging for forgiveness and expecting me to yell at her. Instead, I calmly packed my things. Karen insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for her, and that everyone makes mistakes in marriage. When she realized I wasn't going to take any action, she switched tactics, saying our son would be affected by a divorce and that children shouldn't grow up in broken homes. I reminded her that I might not even be the father, which made her cry more, accusing me of cruelty. It seemed she believed nothing could push me to leave the marriage. Perhaps it was partly my fault for letting things slide previously. While I did love her, it felt more like it stemmed from the belief that we had a son together and had been through college together. Karen kept insisting that it wasn't too late to mend things, but I struggled to believe her and had no patience left. Trust had become a significant issue, and her words felt hollow. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget that she had slept with my brother. I've always believed in forgiving mistakes because we are all flawed. But this went beyond what was acceptable. I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went straight to my parents and revealed everything about my wife's affair with David, explaining how they had secretly slept together for years. The shock on their faces was undeniable. True to her nature, my mother initially tried to defend David, insisting that her son could never betray his own brother. Determined to reveal the truth, I asked my parents to remain silent while I called David in front of them. I instructed them to stay quiet so I could catch David off guard, making him think it was a private call. When David answered the phone, I confronted him about the affair. At first, he vehemently denied it, refusing to accept any responsibility. However, when I told him Karen had confessed everything, he started blaming her, calling her characterless. He claimed it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him and that he was the better-looking brother. I told him firmly that I would expose him to everyone when David mocked me, saying no one would believe me because he was the golden child. I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth. Knowing our parents had heard everything, David went quiet and then stammered, attempting to explain himself and salvage his image. My mother, still in shock, demanded an explanation from David. He stuttered through a weak attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone but himself and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see my mother, who had once been protective of her favored son, now feeling a mix of disappointment and anger. In that charged moment, I experienced a strange sense of vindication. For years, I had endured David's torment. Now the truth was out, and the roles were reversed. It was David who stood exposed, his actions bare for everyone to see. As David's words faltered, my dad, usually reserved in his expressions, couldn't contain his disappointment. He asked for the phone and began speaking with David. "David?" My father started, his voice heavy with disappointment. "What you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother. It's a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions have severe consequences and have irreparably shattered the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family loyalty and decency. What you've shown today goes against everything I've tried to instill in you." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle into David's conscience. "Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You've not only hurt him, but you've also torn apart the bonds that hold our family together. Your mother and I are partly to blame for what you've become, but we will no longer tolerate this behavior. From today onward, you are cut off from the college funds I set up for you. You'll have to figure out how to cover your university fees on your own. I will also stop financing your lifestyle. Do you think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Let's see how you manage without my money." Throughout this, I kept my composure, though I initially wanted to scream at David. Watching my dad confront him was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true character, and it was evident he had underestimated the repercussions. Despite David's persistent protests, my mother continued to rationalize his behavior, but my father quickly ended the call, silencing David's attempts to explain his actions. Afterward, my mom came to me and hugged me. It had been a long time since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace, there was an unspoken understanding and support amid the family turmoil. She apologized for not believing me all this time. My 14-year-old self could have never imagined this moment, being validated and embraced by my mother. Following this, my dad helped me find a good lawyer for my divorce from Karen. She and her lawyer attempted to fight dirty, asking for alimony since I earned more than she did, but her affair played significantly in my favor. We also conducted a paternity test, which confirmed that David was indeed the father of the child. The news was incredibly painful, even worse than discovering Karen's infidelity. I was enraged that the son I had loved and raised wasn't mine. I decided to remain strong. Karen pleaded with me to continue visiting my son, arguing he shouldn't be punished for the situation, but I couldn't bear to see him. He reminded me too much of David, and I hated it. After my divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me as I moved into my own bachelor pad. It felt surreal to live alone since I had married young and never truly experienced independence. However, my naturally independent nature allowed me to quickly adapt to my new lifestyle, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. 2 weeks ago, my dad called to tell me he was considering altering his will because he didn't want to leave anything to David. My dad is incredibly stubborn, and once he decided to eliminate David from his life, he stuck to it. David attempted to reach out to our parents and even showed up at their doorstep, begging for forgiveness, but they refused to let him in. Even my mother, who usually caved into David's tantrums, seemed finished with him. It must have been tough for her. David never texted me to apologize for his actions, demonstrating he didn't regret what he had done. He was merely upset about being cut off from our parents. My dad informed me he intended to leave everything to me, ensuring that David wouldn't contest it later. He planned to leave David just $1. I was shocked. My dad had worked hard his entire life, including his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance, totaling nearly $2 million. The only condition in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue living in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I didn't mind this since I wanted to care for my mom in her final days. Somehow, David found out about this and, unable to contact our parents, called me yesterday trying to apologize. He explained how he was struggling in college and that after Karen revealed the paternity of the child, she had been pressuring him for child support. He said he had no money and was searching for part-time jobs, but was unsuccessful. He pleaded with me to speak to our family to start fresh as he needed my help. I laughed in his face and told him I was done with him. I reminded him that he should have considered the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. David argued that I was being unfair and that Karen deserved some blame, to which I agreed. I reminded him that I had divorced her, making her his responsibility now. He shouldn't be contacting me to complain about her or the child, as these were the consequences of his own action. David began to raise his voice, but I interrupted him, reminding him that he was no longer the favored child in the family, but the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. At that moment, David started to cry, expressing how everyone, including our grandparents and relatives, had turned against him. While this was true, it was no longer my concern. I told him we were finished and that he should never call me again, as I no longer considered him my brother. Since then, I've replayed the conversation in my mind. Despite my animosity toward my brother, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we were kids. I won't deny it pained me a little to see him so helpless. So, I suppose I'm here to ask if I should speak with our parents about him or if I would be wrong not to. Update 1. Hi everyone. Many of you have been asking why I no longer have contact with my son, Henry, and some have even labeled me cruel. I need to clarify that I am not comfortable raising another man's child. This isn't a typical stepson situation. I was led to believe Henry was my son, only to later find out he is actually my brother, David's son. Naturally, this revelation deeply wounded me, and I cried over it for days. The main reason I don't want any interaction with Henry is that I no longer wish to have Karen in my life. If I remain connected to her child, she will find a way to re-enter my life, and I need my space. You might think I'm harsh or selfish, but I can't bear to see him again, at least not for a very long time. Update 2. Most of you correctly guessed that it was my mother who informed David about my dad changing his will, prompting David to call me as a last-ditch effort to reconcile. I confronted her in front of my dad, and she broke down, saying I had punished David enough and that he had learned his lesson. My dad firmly told her that if she believed what David did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her because he could never forgive such a betrayal. This threat silenced my mother. My dad made it clear that if she ever communicated with David again and we discovered it, she could pack her bags and leave. As I mentioned, my dad is very stubborn. Hopefully, my mother will learn from her mistakes. Update 3. Reddit. It's been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved over the last few months. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he treats me more like a buddy than a son. Although my mother misses David, she has stayed away from him. The last I heard about David came from my cousin, who said he has been asking everyone for money and eventually dropped out of college due to being unable to pay the fees. He and Karen are living together, and he has a part-time job as a mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Henry together, which is a good thing, I guess. I never discussed David with my parents, and they don't bring him up either. For everyone asking, I'm doing quite well. I was promoted at work 2 months ago, so my salary has significantly improved. I haven't been dating anyone yet, as I feel I still need time and space to heal. I've been attending therapy, and we'll see how that goes. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more shocking real-life stories happening around you.